the different reactions that people can have to a personal frailty or a personal injury or something, because you can see some people just slump and go,
into a shell. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, or my knee's playing up again.
Yeah.
And
you
you can
add in
see
the voice effect.
I like to be a bit dramatic sometimes, Hamza.
I mean, life is boring without some drama, so.
Exactly.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Modern Man Podcast, Conversations on the Human Experience. I'm your host, as usual, Hamza, and today we're diving deep into the world of purpose, freedom, and fulfillment with Ken Kelling. Ken is a seasoned professional with over 25 years of experience in events, PR, and public affairs. He's worked with everyone from prime ministers to traffic managers, but when he turned 50, he made a significant shift. He decided to step back from the 9-to-5 and embark on a journey of self-discovery and personal growth, ultimately becoming a professional accredited life coach. Ken specializes in helping people navigate the often turbulent waters of midlife and retirement, guiding them towards a life of purpose and meaning. He's passionate about helping people uncover their authentic selves and create a fulfilling next chapter, whether that involves a complete career change, a shift in priorities, or simply finding more joy in the purpose of everyday life. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the absolute amazing Ken. Hi, Ken. Welcome to the Modern Man Podcast.
Hi, Hamza. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm loving this phrase that you said right at the beginning of your introduction, the human experience. Yes. I think that's really lovely phrase and something we don't always think about. But, at the end of the day, we are all human. That's why we're here.
Exactly.
And that's what drives us. And I think, exploring that through your podcast is very admirable and hopefully very interesting. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's a phrase that just jumped out at me.
Do you know one of the reasons why I actually came up with that tagline and emphasized on that is because with the Modern Man Podcast, a lot of people can look at it and think, okay, this is directed specifically at men. But I didn't want it to be like that because a lot of the things that people share and a lot of the experiences people have are universal. They kind of apply to a lot of people. So I really wanted to put that out there to say, this is a Modern Man Podcast, but we have conversations on the human experience because at the end of the day, we're all human, like you said. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We might get into this a little bit because you mentioned that I'm a life coach and I work for a coaching school that trains life coaches. That's one of the things I do now.
Oh, amazing.
And the mission of that school, which is about training coaches, but in more recent times, we've changed the mission statement or the vision for that school. And we now talk about having a vision of helping people to respond to the idea of being human in the 21st century. Because with all of the global challenges, the fractiousness, the polarization that you kind of see in your social media feeds and out there and everywhere else, this unifying idea that you just mentioned about we're all human, and what does it mean to be human, and what are the shared experiences that we have as human beings is ever more important because we're not going to solve the challenges of the world unless we come together and unless we recognize that beneath different opinions on stuff we're all humans, and so coaching is one of those things around personal development and other stuff that I think can help us to understand that, understand ourselves a bit better, and understand other people. And I think you're right. I think we need a lot more of that if we're to make a go of surviving as a species and a human race, Hamza. If we're to make all this stuff work, we've got to be more human, I think, and recognize unification in that idea.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. So, Ken, tell me your story.
Yeah. So, well, in a nutshell, I guess the two or three sort of things that mainly influenced my life was I was born in Wales, in
Wow.
Swansea, in South
Oh,
Wales.
nice.
Go Swansea City. And lived in Wales till I was about 13.
Okay.
My parents are from Scotland, actually, just to make life
Oh,
confusing.
nice.
They're both from Edinburgh, but
Wow.
well, they are very spiritual. They have a strong faith in the Baptist Church. So I was brought up with quite a religious upbringing.
Oh, wow.
I'm not a person of faith anymore. I'm a kind of avowed atheist, but in the early days, that spirituality and values, where your values come from, they're often set in childhood. So that was a big influence on me. But career-wise, I went into PR, public relations, and communications, and I spent about 25 years in that. And as you say, there was some political stuff in there, working with politicians and all sorts of people at quite a high level.
Yeah.
Culminated for me in a job on the London Olympic Games in 2012. Hamza, if you can remember those.
Cool. Oh, yeah, I definitely can. I was
Cool.
living in
So-
Birmingham at the time, and the torch came past my student accommodation. So yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget that.
Yeah, I love it. So that's what I worked on. I worked on the torch relay.
Wow.
And I was, I worked across the country, but primarily I was responsible for London for the last 7 days when the Olympic torch came through London and went to the stadium for the lighting of the cauldron. So yeah, it was an amazing job, really once in a lifetime kind of job for someone in PR and events and media and stuff.
Yeah.
So after that, I took some time out, and I thought, wow, how do you follow that as a career? And what I kind of reflected on was, well, I wanted to work for myself. I thought I wanted to work more flexibly. And as you said in your introduction, there was something about this idea of purpose and fulfillment that was important to me as well. And I, at that time, then found myself kind of interested in coaching and life coaching, and didn't know too much about it. What does it mean? But I knew that it involved listening to people.
Yeah.
And I considered myself a good listener. And so I looked into that, and so for the last 10 years or so, that became my way of earning a living. Was to be a life coach and work with people one-to-one, but also to help train and supervise other coaches as well who were learning the skills involved. So that's been the last decade, and as we're going on to talk about, my interest in my own developing age. I turned 60 last year.
Oh, wow.
And my own... Yes, I know I don't look it, Hamza. Thank you very much.
You don't look a day over 45.
Oh,
What do you
bless
mean?
you. Thank you. I wasn't fishing for that at all. But my experience of what that meant, and was starting to become really interesting. And what we'll probably go on to talk about is, I guess, the sort of the modern day perceptions of what does something like retirement mean, or what does aging mean, and is it changing? Is it different? What do we need to think about? And as I was sort of experiencing this and exploring it with people, I realized that we've got, we have this quite outdated model, I think, as a society about what growing older and what retirement means, versus a population that's living longer and living healthier into old age. So what I could see, I think, was this sort of mismatch between what people were being told retirement or aging is like, and what they actually wanted and what their experiences was like. Driven quite a lot, maybe by people slightly older than me, the sort of, the baby boomer generation, grew up in the 60s and were, very, very used to, being free, being forceful, being independent. The aging rocker stereotype, I guess, is one of them.
Yeah.
But as that generation was becoming older, they were well, still are, living to a good age, really interested in keeping active, and they're not the helpless sort of walking with the stick kind of image that we all have of
Yes.
someone who's older in
Older, yeah.
inverted commas. So this is really interesting to me, and the biggest thing that I could see was this idea of transition.
Okay.
So how do we go from being slightly obsessed and busy with work for 30, 40 years, and then so used to that, so used to what that means, so used to building a career, worrying about money, buying a house, all of that stuff, and then transitioning into something else. And what I could see was, although we get a lot of stuff about finances and pensions and money, that's the big message. We get very little about mindset.
Of course.
So we get very little about how we're going to adjust to this. How do we adapt to something that's very different to what's been my decades of life. And so that transition period, that just transition of adapting and adjusting, I could see people struggling with that. And as a life coach, that was like, wow, there's perhaps something I can help people with.
Oh, that's so cool.
And and the more I talk to people, the more that seemed to be the case. So maybe that's what we'll dig into today. Is sort of how do we think about the future? How do we think about this transition time?
So I was watching an interview you did where you talked about the importance of finding purpose in retirement. How can we redefine successful aging to focus less on what is outward, so the appearance, the finance, how much money we have in the bank, all of that stuff, but focus more towards an inner well-being and personal growth?
Yeah, great question, and hugely significant. So the thing that I talk about, I do retirement or pre-retirement workshops, in terms of helping people who haven't yet retired but are thinking about it. What do I need to think about? And some of that's practical. Where am I going to live? How am I going to earn money, or how much pension do I have or not have? So some of it's practical, and other aspects are mental. They're kind of how we think. And the thing about work is that work in itself quite often delivers a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment. We're not always happy at work, but in general, finding work, thinking about our careers, thinking about what we do, is a pursuit of fulfillment in itself. We hear a lot more about that, don't we, these days? About I want to do a job, but I want to feel worthwhile at the same time. We hear that particularly from young people now. It's sort of in my generation or previous, like you got on with your work and you didn't complain about it, but
very different.
But now I think quite rightly people are saying, well, if I'm going to put all of this effort in and commit hours, then I'm entitled to feel like I'm doing something that makes a difference. So work delivers a lot of that stuff without us thinking about it.
Okay.
And work also delivers everything. It delivers a schedule. All those meetings that we never want to go to, but at least there's a schedule there.
Yeah.
You know what time you have to get up. What time you need to be in the office or on a Zoom call. So there's a structure. There's a structure there. There's also connections. We meet people. We've got work colleagues, but we've got clients, or we've got connections, contacts, people that we meet through work. It's work is people focused. So if if we start to take some of that away, which is, what the idea of retirement is, suddenly you have to think about, well, how do I create my own schedule? Who's going to do stuff for me? Where's the conversations that I used to have about the weekend? When you bump into someone in the corridor or whatever, where's that little social interaction?
Yeah.
All of that stuff can disappear. So suddenly you're kind of in this position where you've got to do that stuff for yourself. And your mind can then start to think, well, if it's just me on my own, there's no work. What am I going to do that's purposeful? What am I going to do that's fulfilling? How am I going to fill my days? And, what a lot of people kind of suddenly realize is that, that sociability, that being with other people, is what delivers that purpose. It is what delivers that fulfillment. But it can sometimes look like, if there's another 20 years or so of life, 20 or 30 years of life after I stop working, how am I going to make that worthwhile? How am I going to make that fulfilling?
Yeah.
So that's why you see, a lot of people will take up voluntary work, and a lot of people will think, well, now's my time to kind of, to give something back. But, I think for me, those people who think that retirement's just going to be playing golf and going on endless cruises, which seems to be what my social media feed seems to think what I want to do. I think those things only go so far because, we are, to go back to our earlier conversation, we're human beings, we seek meaning in life. We seek purpose in life. We want to, this phrase, we want to self-actualize. We want to become the best versions of ourselves. And that, that's a driving human urge, I believe. So it's about more than golf and cruises. It's about how do I use everything and my experience and my knowledge and wisdom, and how do I do that in the service of other people?
Yeah.
But, that's not what you'd think if you were just looking at the media and marketing and all the stuff that comes your way, because that's all about, a villa in Spain and having a beer on the beach and putting your feet up. I think that only lasts so long. We have to find something, I think, that stimulates and fulfills us.
Yeah, because it's almost like anything in life, right? When you introduce yourself to something, your body keeps wanting more. So if you do go on that cruise, what's next? Your body is always trying to find that sense of purpose, that sense of fulfillment, that sense of curiosity. And interesting enough, that was going to be my next question. What are some of the ways that people can maintain a sense of adventure and curiosity throughout life, even as some people might encounter, some physical limitation with age or health, restrictions? How can people still stay active and curious and excited for life, even at an older age?
Yeah, I think you've hit on it with that word curious or curiosity, because just to bring that to life. So I was on a call the other day with some colleagues who are, working in this space. And, one of them was saying they have a couple of friends who are retired and, what they do is they get up in the morning quite late.
Yeah.
And generally put the TV on, and it's quite a lot of watching daytime TV. Yay! It's not really stimulating. Yeah, Hamza, is it? And if I end up doing that, please take me out and do something to end it. But because if we lose that curiosity about life, if we lose that passion and that zest for life, it's very easy to just sort of slide down into a very repetitive and a very potentially dull life, and I think sometimes we mistake that for this idea of resting in retirement and putting our feet up, because as you were saying about the body, and the same is true about the mind. We need to keep that stimulation going.
Yeah.
So, there are plenty of opportunities out there in retirement for, studying, for example, taking a study course. There's a thing called the University of the Third Age, which is specifically for people who want to have a sort of, formal structure for studying. But any kind of continuous learning is really important, if that's self-learning or if that's in a structured way. Learning is hugely important. I think mingling with people not of your own age group is really important. Because I talk to people who say they get so much from. Yes, they've got friends and whoever who are the same as them.
Yes, yeah.
But they're more stimulated by younger people.
Yeah.
And I think to your point about where we might be restricted in some kind of way, the counter thing to that for me is this idea of energy and personal energy.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure and I know that I know of the different reactions that people can have to a personal frailty or a personal injury or something. Because you can see some people just slump and go
into a shell. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, or my knee's playing up again.
Yeah.
And
you
can
add in the voice effect.
I like to be a bit dramatic sometimes, Hamza.
I mean, life is boring without some drama. So
exactly. But you know what I mean? Some people will sort of, they'll see themselves as victims.
Yes, yeah.
And it's very easy to do that. It's very easy to see yourself as a victim, in this space.
Yes.
I can't do anything about my knees because it's my old age. Rubbish, right? Build up your leg muscles.
Yeah. And I was just going to add to what you said as well, like thinking about it, if you take the mind and the body, both of these things, I think a lot of times people forget that they are both muscles. They still need to be developed. So I love that you talked about the University of the University of the Third Age. That's really good to know, because some people, like you said, once people think of retirement or think of getting older, they think, okay, it's time to stop. But no, you still need to keep that body active. You still need to keep the muscles active, walking, meeting up with friends, studying, reading books, being interested in a lot of other things. I think for me, I would love people. And I talk to my mom about it, and my dad, my parents, are getting older now. And I talk to them about it, and I say, now that you have a lot more time, it's not for you to just completely stop. It's for you to add on or do those things that you weren't able to do previously because you had no time. So now you can play golf 5 times a week. That's good because you're walking for hours. Previously you couldn't, right? You wanted to, but now you can. But yeah, I love that you talked about keeping the mind and body active as well. Yeah.
It's funny you should mention your mum and your dad, because another aspect of this is some of the kind of gender stereotypes and how we fall into those as well, and how those play out more widely. Because I think a lot of the research and a lot of the kind of anecdotal evidence will show that women, as we know, are much better kind of connectors and communicators than we are, Hamza, right? I think that's just a given.
It is.
Let's just be clear about it. And so what that means is that women are really great at keeping social networks and keeping those going and talking and chatting and all the rest of it. Whereas men can clam up quite a lot, as we know. And also, if those gender stereotypes are playing out in terms of the workforce, and traditionally it's still predominantly a man who will be going out to work. If you imagine that man suddenly stopping work and suddenly being at home a lot more, let's say your dad is suddenly at home a lot, you can imagine the stereotypes about that. You get out from under my feet and stop watching daytime telly and go and do something. And these are things you see in sitcoms sometimes, aren't they? But they have a grain of truth about them, and I think it means that men, I think, have to make more of a conscious effort to keep connections.
Yes, absolutely.
To keep social, to find something that's going to keep them active.
Yeah.
And it's men, I think, who are largely more in danger of sliding into a kind of a torpor of retirement, where
Yeah,
they're
I
just
agree.
sitting around not really knowing what to do.
Yeah. We talked about it on a previous episode of the podcast with a guest called Winston Ben Clements. And he was saying that for us men, we kind of need something to bring us together. Like we need to know, oh, we're watching football together, or we're playing video games together, or we're, doing something. You can't just put a group of men in a room and expect them to automatically just start discussing their feelings. But the same is not the same the same can't be said for women, because you put a group of women in the room, come back a few hours later, and they're most likely talking about their feelings and what they've been through and what they're going through, and trying to help each other out and encourage each other. And yeah, it's just interesting to see that. And I feel like it's so important, especially as people grow older, even for myself, right? I'm not even close to thinking about retirement age, but I know for me right now, community is so important, because yes, I'm getting, a sense of purpose and fulfillment from work, and, getting promotions, and, getting new job offers and new clients and all of that stuff. But outside of that, I know that once work finishes at 5, I'm not close friends with my work colleagues, right? So who am I talking to apart from my own family to create that sense of community? Who am I running to for, walks on the weekend just to discuss, personal issues and things like that? So community is super important. Yeah.
100% agree with all of that. And that's great. And I think the other aspect to that kind of gender side of things is that, and I think again, men tend to do this more, is that once they've left work, for example, I hear this a lot, Hamza. People will say, well, since I left work, no one's got in touch with me. And I, now I'm yesterday's man. And, the truth is that if we're in that position, we have to take more responsibility. Suddenly it's on us. Suddenly it's on us to be proactive, to phone people up, to make arrangements, to see people.
Yeah.
Because why should all those people ring you up?
Also, like if they're still in work, you're the one with more of the free time to begin with.
Exactly.
Secondly, I've had this in friendships and in some relationships in the past, where a lot of people forget that friendships are a two-way street, right? If I don't call you, it doesn't mean that I don't want to speak to you. You also have a phone, pick up the phone and call. I feel like when you can satisfy in yourself that you have made an effort and the effort isn't being reciprocated, then you could probably say, okay, I might back off a bit, but actually feel that you have made an effort, not just ringing once or sending one message or just sitting back and expecting people to reach out to you. People have, a lot of other things going on as well. It doesn't mean they don't want a relationship with you. It just means that you might have to extend the olive branch. You might have to pick up the phone and call. You might have to make the plan. You might have to say, hey, can we meet up on this day at this time at this place? But yeah.
No, I again agree with all of that, and what it's pulling out, I think, is certainly in terms of this transition into retirement, which can be a long time. When it's not like leaving work one day and being retired the next. It can be a longer period, but I think the overall point I think that we're agreeing on here is when you're in that position, you might find yourself having to be more proactive, and you might find yourself having to be on the front foot more than you might have expected.
Of course.
Because nothing will happen unless you make it happen. So that accountability, that responsibility, becomes upon us. And the other theme, excuse me, the other theme I think that's important is, and this might be an interesting one to focus on, is it's about what we're putting in place now, and it's about the habits that we have now, and taking those into retirement, or taking those into aging, taking those into growing older, because our bodies, our minds, as you were saying, they both need stimulation.
Yes.
If we're doing that from a standing start after we've left work, it can be quite overwhelming. So there's a real need, I think, to get those habits going, get those habits in place, so that those are the things, those good habits are the things that you keep going on.
Yes. Yeah.
So everybody talks about the importance of habits. I think it's even more important in this phase of life.
Of course, yeah. And there's something you talked about I wanted us to expand on a bit more, and that's intergenerational connection. So in what ways do you feel like these intergenerational connections and mentorship contributes to a more fulfilling and meaningful aging experience, both for a younger or an older individual?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, I have to hands up say this isn't something I've got direct experience of, and I should maybe explore that a bit. But certainly the communication that I get back from people is, at the one end, the older person really benefits from, we mentioned this word energy.
Yes.
Benefits from the energy, the stimulation of someone from a different and younger generation.
Of course.
The learning that people can get. And of course, the young person, if they can put aside their ageism stereotypes for 1 minute, but you see this in other cultures, don't you? You see this in Eastern cultures in particular, where the older person is seen as wise and having experience and
to be respected.
To be respected, and stuff that they can learn.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win thing, isn't it? And I do know that there are schemes out there that will do that, but I only know them conceptually at the moment. I don't have practical experience of that. But I think the more that we put that kind of structure in place, to your point about community, for example, that the more there is of that kind of interchange and exchange,
of course,
the better for both sides, I think.
And just from a personal point of view, I'm someone that I currently have a mentor who is a lot older than I am, and I really value and treasure that relationship, and I'm blessed to have that relationship because, like you said, I was brought up in Nigeria, so African culture is very much, your elders are here and you are here. They are to be respected, they are to be cherished, they're to be taken care of, and all the good things are awarded to people of a certain age group because they've earned it. They've been on this earth for a while, and I really like that. I was brought up with that, and currently with my mentor, who is older than me, it's a lot nicer to be able to have a conversation with someone who has been there, done that, seen it, been in a totally different sphere of life, been in a totally different, being brought up in a totally different world. And it's really great because a lot of the fears I have, he's kind of really helped me see past them. I remember being so concerned when we were thinking about, getting a place. And I was like, what happens if I lose my job? What happens if this? What happens if that? And he just goes, well, you just sell it. And I'm like, oh, actually, yeah, true. But it's because I've never seen that before. I remember when I was trying to, I was looking at leaving a previous company and moving into a new one, and I was so scared. I was almost paralyzed with fear about leaving. And he said, why are you so scared? I was like, I've never left a company before. He's like, oh, you'll be fine. I've left so many companies. I have so many years of, like moving and finding out things that work for you. And I feel like there's just that little bit of encouragement, especially for someone like me who is a first-generation immigrant. So my parents are born and bred in Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria. I moved here when I was 16. So I don't really have a lot of elderly figures telling me how to go through life living in the UK. So to have someone who is able to, look at these things and tell you, well, okay, this is not how things work. This is how you should think about it. And I'm not saying this so that everyone, listen to someone else and say, okay, I'm going to do exactly what they've said, how they've said it. But it's about taking all these experiences and kind of thinking about it and making your own path. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to follow exactly what he's done. But it does help me to keep my eyes out at what to look for. So personally, just from a personal point of view, I think intergenerational connections are so important. They just help people know, what else life could be outside of their bubble and their sphere.
Yeah, I love all of that. That's really great, and that sounds really rich and fertile in terms of the opportunity to learn. And I hope we continue to have lots of things like that. The thing that was coming up for me, we haven't quite spoken about this, but we are touching on kind of how different cultures experience older people, degree of respect. And what I was thinking when you were talking is, how does that play out in the UK and other kind of European countries, perhaps, but specifically in the UK, and we do still face quite a lot of ageism here. It's almost like the sort of the last ism to be recognised.
Yeah.
And quite often in sort of ways that I think people still have a blind spot on.
Of course.
And I'll give you a very concrete example of this. We were talking about music before we began recording, but it was Glastonbury last year that Elton John headlined.
Which I couldn't get tickets for, by the way. I was even trying to help a friend. We had like 5 or 10 different computers.
Oh, you didn't get it. You didn't get through.
I mean, if Glastonbury, you're listening to this and you want to sponsor us and give us a ticket,
get Hamza some tickets next time. It's good on the telly though, isn't it?
It's probably because I've never been as well, so I like really wanted to, experience it. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Carry on.
Yeah, but so you've got a visceral memory anyway of that, and it was great. I watched it, and it was really great. And then in the just in the stuff that I was seeing the next day in social media stuff, there was these comments and in people who might be my friends or my connections or whatever, who I generally hope are quite kind of enlightened about stuff.
Yeah.
And there would be these comments about did you see Elton John, blah blah blah, and then there would be some comment that would say, he looked like he'd pooed himself or something, or they would talk about the way he was walking, and they would talk about something to do with his age. Yeah. And or his frailty, or nothing to do with the music. The comment would be something in that, and I was thinking, would you say that about someone's race or their gender or their culture, or would you make the same kind of comment? And what really struck me was they obviously thought that's completely acceptable, and I think we still do have a degree of structural ageism. Yeah. That isn't always challenged in the way that it might be challenged in other aspects, and is quite casual. Yeah. But somehow we think that that's fine. Yeah. So the conversation we're having about different cultures and how they respect elders and all the rest of it. I think there is a challenge in this country still for that kind of stuff, because it's very easy to put the word old in front of an insult.
This is true.
Or it's very easy to put the word old in front of...
As if it's a bad thing. That's all we aspire to be. We want to be older people, right?
We're all going to be there. So, it's the most pointless insult ever.
It's so silly.
Because we're all going to get there.
I think obviously, you talking about it being, one of the last ageism to, be discussed. It's probably also because it's just it seems like plain language, if that makes sense, right? It's not something that is overtly or on the face of it offensive, but it's because people don't think about it. And that leads me, quite nicely to my next question, which was around how do you feel communities and societies can better support individuals in aging gracefully and maintain their independence and dignity? Because if you think, like, for the example that you just gave with Elton John, right? I would think the conversation would be around what an incredible talent he is, and the fact that we still get to hear his voice and feel his presence even after all of these years. So how, in your opinion, do you feel like communities and countries can really help support aging people so they can keep their dignity, and really feel part of the of the discussion and community?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think it's all of our job. You know, it's up to all of us to shift this if it
Of
needs
course.
shifting.
Yeah.
And you know what I kind of see, I guess, from a helicopter view on this is that, you know, the Elton Johns of the world, or, you know, just ordinary people who are living their life and staying active and present and you know, unashamed of who they are. That the more people are doing that, you know, the more that we can, it becomes acceptable in inverted commas. So to go back to music, just use that as an example. You know, for a long time, music was, you know, was seen as youth culture. It's to do with young people, and of course that's true in terms of new trends and all the rest of it. But you know, we're at this stage now where you do have the Elton Johns of the world, or you have the, you know, have the Eagles, or you have the, you know, Beach Boys, or whoever. So you do have musicians, artists, and people who've been around for a long time and who are still doing it. You know, the Stones, great example. So you know, fortunately, you know, as time goes on, you know, these people are very visible and very present, and like you say, we can start to you know, admire and respect and enjoy what people like that are still doing. And if you take that model and just put it into, you know, the lives of people who aren't musicians or artists or everything else, it's the same principle. You know, stay active, stay visible. Because all of that role modeling and all of that you know, continuing to do what you love doing is, I mean, it demonstrates confidence, it demonstrates assertiveness. So you know, there's a general thing, I think, there about being visible and just making sure that as we get older, we don't disappear. You know, and we don't become, you know, over. Because I think we have our own ageist sometimes. You know, we're very prone to our own ageism. Of, you know, I'm too old for this, or I'm too old for that. Or, you know,
well, it goes back
that's
to what you've said, you know, about it's all of our responsibility, right? If a lot of people, not a lot of people, people in general are, your upbringing and your environment really determines who you grow up to be, right? So if you're living in a society and a time and an environment where people have this mentality that older is not as good, or older is bad, or they have the right to, you know, insult, to say things about people who are aging, then you kind of grow up with that mentality, feeling like, oh, when I get older, it's not as desirable. I want to be younger. I want the youth, instead of actually really enjoying each phase of your life. So yeah, I think it really, how you grow up and the society you're in really affects how you start thinking as you grow older. But as everyone says, you know, our development is our responsibility. So even if those things are what we learned, we need to work on unlearning them to prepare ourselves.
Fantastic.
Right?
Yeah, fantastic. Exactly. All of that. And to take another example, because you asked about, you know, how we collectively, because we've talked a bit about ourselves and musicians and other people, but you know, there is now only recently has there been a minister in government with a responsibility for loneliness.
Wow.
And you know, a decade ago or however long, that would have been, you know, unheard of. But you know, the sort of recognition about loneliness, or the lack of social connection, the lack of social contact, and what that can do for our physical and mental well-being has become, you know, much more recognized. So you know, there are now government policies, government strategies, government initiatives to recognize that you know, the UK and other countries do have a growing challenge here about the increasing numbers of people who are on their own and who may be isolated, or who might not see people, and it does, you know, it does ask questions of community, transport, all you know, the internet and the availability of connection. You know, all of these big kind of ideas and big issues to think about, because the social cost of loneliness is huge.
It is, yeah.
And there are some direct kind of there's some I'm sure tangible research that demonstrates that if we can make people feel less lonely in all of the physical and mental illnesses that might come with that, we're going to save on the NHS.
I mean,
there's no doubt that people who succumb to that kind of depression or other things will end up in a more expensive place.
Hey there, it's Hamza. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. For more info, check out our website at tmmpodcast.com. Now, back to the episode. But with multiple different, reasons to need the health services, because even when you think about people who are in comas and people who are going through different illnesses and recovery, the doctors are always advising, and the counselors are advising, and the nurses are advising, for family to be around them, to be surrounded by family, be surrounded by love. It's not really that just having these people around you has some sort of magical, link to speed up your healing and your recovery, but it's because the mind is not focused and thinking on all the depressing things. It's instead focused on love and focused on family and focused on relationships. And even, when you talked about things like if someone said, they have something wrong with their knee, having that community and those people around you after you have a knee surgery, for example, you need to exercise those muscles, right? To get that knee back into a place. Having that, that love and support around you is what helps. So definitely tackling loneliness would really help, because it's also something that goes across the ages, right? There are people who are in their 20s, they're lonely. There are people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So, so absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it comes back to the phrase that we were talking about right at the beginning, wasn't it? The human experience. Yes. Because, just because we are a certain number, a certain age, that doesn't become any less important. Yeah. That having that human experience, because they do affect our physical and our mental well-being. Yeah. So this weekend I was with my own mother, who's 90. Oh, wow. And she's doing pretty well. She lives on her own in the home that she shared with my dad for 67 years of marriage. Hamza, think about that.
Beautiful.
67 years. And she's
the stories she will have to tell.
Oh yeah, she does. Well, she was 15 and my dad was 16, and they lived 400 yards from each other.
Oh my God, it's too cute.
I know. Yeah. So, but she's doing fine. We've got some people coming in who to help her out three times a week. But the conversation we had this weekend was quite funny, because I was up there because she was having some pain and needed a bit of help, and I was encouraging her to allow us to bring in even more help and support for her. And I called it round one because she refused, and I said, well, we're going to come back to this for round 2 and 3. But the interesting thing is, that my point here is about the human experience, because part of her wants to maintain that independence, and part of her wants to maintain the idea of staying active and being able to do things. Part of her also wants to recognise that there are there's some things that she can't do and does she need some help with. It's something I think that we don't think about too much, and we don't think about it. Well, you certainly don't think about it at your age. But until it's there, and suddenly we're having to deal with these very human ideas of being connected to other people. Yes. Yeah. Not losing our independence. But also recognizing, there are some things we may need to adjust or adapt to.
Of course. Yeah. So, in your own experience, what are some of the valuable lessons you've learned from your own journey, and how have those lessons informed your coaching and practice? So some of them have come up already. If we go back to some of those and pull them out as kind of summarized messages, I guess, one of them is
the need to be proactive and, not to leave everything too late. One of them is about, thinking about your mindset and your attitude as well as finances. And whenever people talk about retirement, Hamza, it's always about money. It's always like, it's always about money. And the adverts that you get and things that are on the telly, it's always about money. And it's never anything about mindset and how to approach it, how to stay positive, how to be, have a positive outlook. Because positive people live longer. The research shows that if you have a positive attitude to aging and retirement, you can live 4, 5, 6 years longer. So this isn't fairy tale stuff. This is real and it's important. So thinking about your mindset and your attitude is another big message. Putting in place the habits that you want to continue, like we've talked about, because if you're, I came about, you asked about my own personal experience. So back in 2008, I was talking about a career I had in PR and communications and politics and everything. And to be honest, Hamza, if I wanted to go to an event 7 nights a week in that kind of field, I would be able to do it because there was always something that was opening, there was always something that was launching, there was always a party or a reception, something that a PR person could go to. Sometimes my own things that I organised, and sometimes what other people. And I would drink at each one of them. I'd be having a drink at each one of them. Yeah. And, I didn't consider myself to have a drink problem, in inverted commas, but I knew that I kind of drank quite regularly. And, it was enough so that, the next day I'd be sluggish or, and I knew that I wasn't getting any younger. And, our ability to kind of process alcohol and everything else is slows down. So, I made a conscious decision that I would give it up. And at the same time, I started exercising more. So I mentioned before we came on air that, I've been for a run today. I go for, I do the park run every Saturday, just 5 kilometers, and I try and do other runs. I've done 2 marathons since I was 50. And what I found was that I started to enjoy the health stuff more than I enjoyed drinking. And, that sort of virtual circle helped me then to go, look, I'm going to go for a run in the morning. I'm not going to have a drink, and I'd rather do the run than have the drink. And so that shifted, and I've kept that for the last 10 plus years.
That's amazing.
And my aim is to keep doing that until my legs fall off. So,
well, here's hoping they don't fall off.
I don't think they will. But so to your question, what have I personally learned? Again, it's back to that proactivity. It's back to I tell you what the phrase that's come up for me, and this might be more memorable. It's about being kind to your future self.
Yes,
being kind to your future self, because we're not very good at that. We're not very good at thinking about ourselves in the future. Hence, that's why we always have that last drink or that last something else, because we're not thinking of.
You're just thinking of you right now.
You're thinking of you right now. Yeah. Oh, let's just have another one. You're not thinking of the Ken who's going to wake up in the morning. And if you magnify that idea to 20, 30 years, what is the Hamza or the Ken or whatever of 20 or 30 years time? Be kind to them. Be kind to them, because it's going to be the same you.
This is true.
It's going to be the same person. Yeah. It's still your head. It's still your body. So think
still
about
your lungs, still your liver, the same one.
100%. Still all of that same stuff, hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully.
And we're not very good at doing that, I don't think. Yeah. We're not very good at thinking, because everything's in our faces, everything's in the moment, everything's kind of, what can I get now? And we think about it in terms of money. We're not too bad at thinking in the future, what sort of money will I need? But we're maybe not so good at thinking about health, well-being, mental, physical. What do I want that to be alongside the pension pot? What do I want that to look like in the future as well? So I think that's what I've That's the big message I've learned. Be kind to your future self.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, so just thinking about your future self now, or rather thinking about your past self, what advice would you give your younger self about aging with grace and embracing the journey ahead?
Yeah, I think I was struck by what you were saying. That your mentor had said, "Oh, if you leave, it's fine to leave a company. Or it's fine to do." I think what happens, as you get more and more experience and wisdom and things under your belt, you get a much greater sense of perspective about decades and length and time. So, yours was a good example. So something like, a career change or a job change or something, we feel that so intensely, don't we? We feel like, oh my God, I can't make a decision and this is so hard. And what if I do the wrong thing and the right thing? As you get older, you realize, like your mentor said, it's fine. You'll adapt, you'll change, just it's more important to get the certainty. So I think I would definitely be saying to my younger self, stop worrying about so much. Stop worrying about everything and just do it. Whatever it is you're thinking about, just do it. Because action is always better than thinking, Hamza. And that's another big thing for me, and that's what I tell my younger self.
I love that. Action is always better than thinking.
Yeah, taking some form of action just moves you on.
Yeah.
And even if it's the wrong thing, and even if it's a disaster, or even if,
you learn from it. There's an experience there, right?
It.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Well, what's worse is just sitting there like angsting and overthinking, because, our brains are these terrible, terrible overthinkers, aren't they? Whilst, back to the human experience, whilst it's great to have consciousness and a neocortex part of our brain, the disadvantage of that is that we can really think too much.
It can be a lot. Yeah.
Stuff.
I know firsthand, because I am a massive overthinker. My mom is always saying to me, she's like, what is wrong with you? And the funny thing is, like, the big stuff I don't really worry about. It's like the little things. And I don't know why. It's just how it is. But you're so right. Like, I've had to physically train myself into, do you know what? You can overthink it. I'm going to do it. And do you know what? It's done.
Good for
right.
you.
Yeah. Just do it. And then overthinking later, at least it's done. But what is so important is not letting your worry and your thoughts and your overthinking and your stress prevent you from actually taking a step, because that's when it becomes a problem. It's okay to, overthink it. And sometimes it helps you make the right decision because you're thinking about it, you're really planning and structuring, and hopefully you're speaking to people. And if you're a praying person, you're praying about it. But never letting it prevent you from actually taking that step, I think, is almost the most important thing there.
Because there will never be enough information, Hamza, will there? Because the brain is always going to be looking for information, and because we have Google and we have all sorts of things now, that is endless. It's absolutely endless, the information you could get. So, unless you take some form of action that says, well, let's just stop thinking about this now, because, I'll be here forever. So, yeah, action is important. And what I was going to say was, you probably know this about the different parts of the brain, but, we've got a part of the brain that's the sort of primitive brain that goes back to kind of, when we were going to be eaten by a lion or something, and so a lot of this stuff it's trying to keep us safe. A lot of this stuff is trying to keep us safe, so it's telling you not to do something in case, because it wants you to not take a risk and to stay comfortable and to not take risks. So we do have to make a big kind of effort to overcome that, and calm that voice down a bit and just say, look, it's going to be okay, or I'm not going to be eaten by a lion or attacked by something. It's fine, just calm down, we're just going to do it and try it. Action over thinking.
So a lot of people build their lives around their careers, especially career professionals, right? when we've talked about this a little bit, but what advice do you have for career professionals as they navigate the workforce, especially being close to retirement age?
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the big things we've talked about some of these already. We've talked about just being aware that work gives you a schedule, it gives you connections, it gives you all these things. So just having some sort of anticipation about how you will handle that if it's no longer provided for you in the workplace. That's one thing. The thing that we haven't touched on, but I think is really important, is the idea of identity and status. And my view on this is it's probably the most important but ignored part of this. So what I mean by this is, as well as the practicalities of what's going to get you up in the morning and what you're going to do and how you're going to plan your day and who you're going to see, which usually comes from work. The other aspect of this is who you are, or who you think you are. Okay. Now, if you've been a teacher for 30, 40 years, okay, if you're no longer a teacher, what are you now? Mostly we describe ourselves as ex-teachers or a retired teacher. Who, we're still talking about ourselves in retirement about what we used to do.
That's true.
And the reason I think that that's problematic is because we're somehow trying to justify who we are based on who we used to be.
Done, yeah.
And if we're at a dinner party, in this sort of retirement phase, and somebody says, "Oh, what do you do?" What's your reply to that? And quite often people feel, I think, that they have to justify themselves. Well, I used to be a teacher. Okay, so this is something you used to be, right? What are you? What are you now?
What are you now?
And the thing that really smacks us in the face is how much we rely on work to define who we are. So, if all of a sudden all I am is Ken Kelling, or all you are is Hamza Idris, right? Who is that? Who is that? Who is that person? And who does that person want to be? Not what do they want to do? Who do they want to be? Because the opportunity here for 20 or 30 years is to become who you really are. That's the big opportunity, because if you haven't got the trappings of work, and you haven't got the status of work, and you haven't got the identity of work, who is it that's left, and who do you want that person to become? And I think that's incredibly rich potentially, but it's also scary. It's also scary.
It's almost like, I feel like at that point, that is when all of the training wheels come off. Like, the bike is now just on its own. Because I still class, obviously as you're growing up, you're with your family and your parents, and you're a child, you're still under the care of your parents. You do have training wheels on, but those could be like the big front and back ones. I feel like once you leave that and you've got work to guide you, yes, you can make mistakes, but you're almost out on your own. But to me, you still have those training wheels, because like you said, you're on a schedule. You're expected to be places at certain amount of time. You're almost given a carrot dangling in front of you that you're constantly chasing. So you have direction. But once you're done with all of that, you've not got a boss who is chasing you. You don't have, reports due in 2 days. You don't have any of those external commitments. It's now just you. So you're right in saying, what is left? Who are you at the end of the day? Not an ex-person, there's not a retired, military officer, not a retired teacher. Who's left,
Yeah. And I think this is one of the biggest things that people struggle with, but they don't always recognize that that's what's going on, because it does require us to think a bit deeper. In the workshops that I do for pre-retirement, there's a quote from a general. You probably won't remember them, Hamza, but there was an American general called Norman Schwarzkopf, and there's a quote from him that says, 2 years ago, I would issue a command, and 500,000 Marines would do what I said. and today I can't get a plumber to come to my house.
Just an ordinary man.
It puts it beautifully. It's
Yeah.
like it's like, I was this thing, I
Yeah.
was this person, and now I'm just, like everyone else. And that it can be a bit of a crash for people, that idea, or it's something that, because everybody's told them, oh, you're so lucky, you go enjoy your retirement, you put your feet up, you go and play golf, you do this, that, and the other, you've earned it, you've earned a rest. If that's what everybody is saying to that person, but actually beneath it all, they're thinking, I don't know who I am anymore. That doesn't help. It doesn't help, the idea that you should just go and put your feet up. Because that's a deeper idea of identity, and that's important to us. So I think that's a big aspect of that transition that doesn't get talked about, both as an issue and an opportunity, because I'm looking forward to 20 years of working on that stuff, and and personal growth and development, and thinking about who is it that I am, who is it I want to be, what are my values, how do I want to live to those values, what do I find meaningful and fulfilling, outside of the world of work. What's my I said previously that I was an atheist, but I still believe in the word spirituality. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean to me? And these things come into focus because you've got a much greater understanding that your life and your time is limited. So we better get thinking about it quick.
And there are a lot less distractions, right? You're not so concerned about so many other things. It's now just putting the most important things into perspective and into focus. What's left. This is what's left.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Because when we're working and everything, our time gets filled, doesn't it? It's it's filled with whatever. Especially if we're working, running a home, a family, commitments, responsibilities. On that subject, grandchildren is an interesting one. And I talk about this spectrum of. At one end, you get people who are like, oh, I can't wait to have grandchildren, and
My mum.
dote over them and they love them and whatever. And at the other end, you get people who are dreading it.
They don't want to be classed as older.
Don't want to be classed as older.
Yeah.
Don't want to be. I don't want to be assumed that they're going to do all the childcare, because what else have you got to do? So here's the kids, just look after them while.
Bye.
So some people are like, whoa, I've got I want to set some boundaries here. So again, there's some thinking to be done, I think, there about what do you think of that, and because it can be very, very easy for you to slip into something that you then start resenting.
Yes, yeah. Following on from that, I had a conversation with an ex-colleague of mine, and he was he was at the retirement age, and he was thinking about retiring, and he could retire, but he didn't want to. So I promised that when I spoke to someone who was a specialist in this field, I was going to ask this question on his behalf. So
Okay.
I was wondering, in your opinion, all right, often there's some people who are able to retire but want to keep working because they are fit, or they still find it stimulating, or they want to do something more. In his case, it was giving back to the community in some sort of way that was still fulfilling to him. What advice do you have for those people in that category, and how do they navigate finding a new sense of purpose, even when they're not sure what that could look like?
Okay, that's a fairly hefty question, Hamza. It's a really good one, but this is why I coach in this area, because it may take 6, 8, 10 sessions of one-to-one conversation
I
to
did
see what
suggest,
it means.
I did suggest it might be a good idea for him to speak to someone, because I thought that would really help in a specific case. But I thought, generally there are a lot of people who still feel that they're able to do something, but they don't know what it is next, and kind of everyone's
Yeah.
looking at them to retire, but they don't want to.
Yeah.
I just wonder
Yeah.
what your
No. Okay.
thoughts are.
Yeah. I have got one thing to sort of pick out, but before I get to that, again, I'll talk about a kind of spectrum.
Yeah.
Because for some people, at one end, there's no choice about continuing to work, or they feel that there's no choice. Let's put it that way. They feel there's no choice about continuing to work because, in their view, they haven't built up enough pension, or they don't have enough finances or resources, or something has happened, in a relationship or whatever else it might be. So there is absolutely a set of people who will believe that they have to continue working from a financial point of view.
Of course.
Now, sometimes they're happy to do that, and sometimes they're not. It all depends on their circumstances. Yeah. And then at the other end, perhaps a bit like the person you were speaking to at the other end, maybe there's people that, I want to keep on working. I like my work. Yeah. My work's great. And why shouldn't I? I still feel that I can contribute. Yeah. My brain's great. I may or may not need the money. Maybe. I don't know. And yeah, why not? Absolutely. Yeah. Why not? So, whatever is fulfilling for you and meaningful and whatever, keep doing as long as you want to. Yeah. I think that's sort of at the other end of the spectrum. The point I wanted to pull out is that there's always this sort of balance between how much money do I need, or how much money do I think I need, and what are these other things that I want to also focus on, like freedom or activities or other things to do. And there's a balance there to be had. Okay. The nugget I was trying to kind of pull out from here is sometimes that amount is less than you think, and we get these perceptions, and also again back to finance and marketing, these things that are thrown off at us. You need £500,000 pension pot, or you need this, you need that. So we sort of get these perceptions sometimes that I can't give up work, or I can only continue working when I get this figure, when I get this amount. And a bit back to your carrot kind of analogy, therefore you're continually chasing after this, and you're continually telling yourself, I can't do it yet. Now, the thing that I often query is, okay, but what can you perhaps adjust, adapt, or accept that might bring that figure down, and therefore do it sooner than you imagined? So it's different for everyone. Yeah, Hamza. It really, as you'd imagine, it's different for everyone. Yeah. One end, oh my God, I've got to keep working. The other end, I really want to keep working. I love it. It's great. But for me, the sort of, for all of us, it's our own thoughts about, what's the life I want to lead, and to what extent do my finances help with that? Now, just, to give you bring that to life a little bit, very boldly, if you're envisioning a retirement of, traveling 5 times a year, and only staying in luxury villas, blah blah blah, right? And you're going to hang on to that idea, then you'll be waiting until that that income,
of course,
meets it. There's nothing. This is not right or wrong. It's just like, okay, so you're going to have to finance that. But my wife has joined this thing called Trusted House Sitters. Okay. She goes and looks after other people's cats. This weekend, she's going to Innsbruck in Austria, the skiing resort, to look after a person's cat.
That's so cool.
She has been to Dusseldorf, Malmo, Oslo, half a dozen places in the last year. She doesn't pay for the accommodation. She looks after a cat, and she can work while she's there because they've got Wi-Fi. So she's not going to luxury villas. She's not doing this, but she is traveling, and she's traveling in a cost-effective way because she now just traps flies by putting the bag under the seat. Cheapest flight, out of school holidays, and she can do that. So she's been to half a dozen places. Now, she doesn't need the luxury villa level of income to do that.
Yes.
So, you know, adjusting, adapting, you know, how can we make this fit
Yes.
in a way? And I really, really think that we can get there sooner if we want to. But hey, keep working if you love it.
That's true. That's true. So, in your opinion, does aging have any effect on romantic relationships? And if so, how can one prepare for and navigate these changes?
Yeah, interesting question. I think it comes back to, you know, this sort of wider, bigger theme about connections, and about, you know, how we maintain those connections.
Yeah.
I mean, the short answer is absolutely. Romantic relationships can go on, you know, for as long as we're alive. You know, I mentioned my parents being married for 67 years. That's a pretty long time.
So cool.
So yeah, there's no reason why they couldn't or shouldn't continue. But the but, I guess, is below that. You know, there are some things that are pertinent. We talked about loneliness. We talked about isolation. We talked about connectivity and connections. You know, there are a lot of people younger who are now, you know, do nothing but dating apps and, you know, that sort of world, which is not going to be as easy perhaps for people who are a little bit older.
Yes,
and you know, not just the technology, because it would be ageist to say they can't use the technology. They absolutely could.
Yeah.
But, you know, it might be more about trust. It might be about, you know, having to think about trusting someone or something a little bit more, and that's an emotion and a feeling rather than a practicality of whatever. And about, you know, getting out and about, just, you know, physically moving ourselves around. I was teaching my mum the Uber app yesterday, but just to add to that, I think I might have just confused her more. Because she kept asking me. She said, "Have you booked the taxi?" And I said, "No, I'm doing it here. I can see the car, Mum. I can see where it's coming."
Did she ask you to book it, and then you were like, "Well, this is a great opportunity. Let me teach you how to do it yourself."
Yeah. I mean, except you have to add into that she can barely see anything. So I was trying to show her where the car was, the Uber car was, but she couldn't quite see it. Anyway. So yeah, I mean, there's also something about just physically, you know, getting around and out about to think about. But I mean, all these things are, you know, they're overcomable, if that's a word. You know, they can be managed. I think the most sort of thing to be careful of, I guess, is, you know, what we tell ourselves. Again, coming back to this inner ageist thing, because, you know, in this area of relationships and romance and stuff, you know, the thing that we hear too often is, "Oh, I'm too old for that." Yeah, or "That's not for me anymore." But that's just something we tell ourselves. You know, it's just a thought. It's not a reality. It's just something we tell ourselves. So I think that's, you know, psychologically maybe the biggest challenge to you know, to get over that, and to not give up on something, or to think something is not either possible or going to happen purely because we've given up.
That's true. So we've talked a lot about aging and just some of the things that people need to do to get prepared, and what people need to be thinking about in terms of shifting people's mindsets and things like that. In your opinion, are there any other hidden gems of aging that people are unaware of and they might not know?
Oh, well, the thing that comes up to me first of all, because we've touched on quite a few things, which is good. I think the thing that's coming up for me in answer to your question is about planning. And, you know, I don't think many of us sit down and think about that very much in advance or at the time. And, you know, planning by a plan, I mean kind of pulling in many of these things that we've been talking about, you know, a plan to replace what work gives us, a plan to stay connected, a plan to stay physically and mentally alert, a plan to, because, you know, back to our conversation about thinking and action, I think we also need some kind of plan or some sort of habits or something, because this stuff doesn't happen by itself.
Yes. It takes work.
And we have to be kind of proactive. And if the underlying thing here is the more that we habitually keep doing things, and that's part of a plan, every week I'm going to X, Y, Z, or every day I'm going to X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
The same is true of our, of our work and many, fitness regimes or other things. I think it's really important to do that for our retirement, because as we've talked about, the habits that we put in place, the regularity, the routine, all of that stuff, even if we don't feel like it. And my wife and I, we exercise every morning. And we're both reasonably fit. And there's often times we don't want to do that. And, you wake up and go, oh God, I've got to do it. And again, I think, it's undermined by this idea that, if we're retired, we just have to do nothing.
That's true.
And I don't think that's a healthy thought. Routines, habits, and consistently sticking at them, I think is as important in this area as it is in any other form of or at any other stage of life. And it's too easy to let that slip and let that glide away with daytime telly and not ringing anyone up.
So as we start to bring the podcast to a close, hindsight is 2020. What do you wish you had known at the beginning of your professional career that you know now?
Yeah, I'll just give an instinctive answer to that, Hamza, and it relates to again something we were just having a chat about before we came on air about music and creativity.
Yeah.
Because since I've been, slowing work down and not working as much, because I'm sort of, I guess, moving towards a sort of semi-retired status. Things to do with music and playing instruments and, writing on Logic Pro, and all sorts of different stuff has sort of come back. And because when I was in my 20s, early 20s, I was into music and playing in bands and stuff like that.
Oh, so
and
cool.
There came a point, I think, where I sort of felt, this all now feels a bit childish. I've got a serious career, and I'm going to concentrate on being a serious person.
I know.
And so then it was, quite a long time of being very serious and doing serious things and thinking that creativity or music or other activities were somehow, frivolous or flippant or, again, maybe my own inner ageist saying, oh, you're too old for this in your 30s or your 40s. But, with hindsight, I think I regret dropping that off a little bit, because, now I'm coming back into some time where, I've now got the time perhaps to sort of indulge some of that creative side of things. That's really exciting now. But part of me thinks, wow, I should have been doing that.
Yes, yeah. Even
when I was working.
I was going to say that you find a lot of people who were creative, especially growing up, and have been through the corporate world, have dropped a lot of their creativity in pursuit of, traditional careers, whatever it might be, dealing with numbers and computers and buildings or whatever. And you see a lot of people try to pick that up. And it's the same with me. That's that's one of the major reasons why, the Modern Man podcast was born, is because of that drive to still use that creative outlet. Because I find, a lot of the times my 9 to 5 and my day to day is a bit mundane, but, still expressing that creativity keeps the mind alive. It makes me want to get up in the morning when, my 9 to 5 is probably causing me a bit of a headache. This is, it's more creative. It helps you, get that, that release and those juices, flowing.
Having listened to you now again, and maybe I've now we found a pithy way of saying this, as hopefully we've extracted these sort of pithy bits out of our conversation. But the pithy bit is maybe don't let go of your passions. No. Don't lose your passions.
No, not at all.
Because that can easily happen. And keep them going, keep that fire going, and and knowing that eventually this sort of retirement, or that as you get older, the opportunity to indulge those passions, even more vigorously may come round again.
Yes, definitely. And so I ask everyone the same question when they come on the Modern Man podcast. What if you could give one piece of advice to the modern man, what would that advice be?
Think about. I am at risk of repeating myself a little bit.
No,
but
please.
think about the habits and the things that you do now that you want to keep forever. The point being, by putting those things in action now and continuing to do them, that's what you'll continue to do into older age, and it hopefully avoids that sort of cliff edge where it's work, suddenly no work. They have to have make this a continuation, not a drop off.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I absolutely receive that, because a lot of times we almost, especially when it comes to exercise, you said it, you wake up in the morning, you don't want to exercise, but you just have to, just to keep that habit. And sometimes we, think about the future and we're like, oh, I want to look like this, but it's the habits that we're doing now. I want to be healthy up until, my 80s and my 90s, but it's the habits that we cultivate now. And like you said, you can't have, what did you call it? A jump start or a dry start? Or I can't
starting from scratch.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. You don't want to be doing that at that time. You already want to have these habits and these, these habits already built up before you get to that point. Amazing.
Exactly.
I'm just going to do a little closure to the episode, but please stay on so I can, obviously I thank you properly and everything. So Ken, as we bring the podcast to a close, do you have anything you want to add, anything you want to plug, anything you want to, mention or talk about?
Yeah, sure. So, well, first of all, I've enjoyed the conversation very much, Hamza, and thank you for having me on. And I think it's very enlightened of you to do both the podcast and also to bring, more and more in all sorts of places. Yeah. So that's great. If anybody's heard anything that interests them and they want to chat with me, then my email address is ken@senseofpurpose.co.uk. ken@senseofpurpose.co.uk. Also, my website is also called senseofpurpose.co.uk. Even if it's just for a chat or a conversation, I'm always happy to hear from people, as you heard from our conversation today. And that's all coaching, and all of the work that I do is at the end of the day about conversations.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Ken. And I will make sure to put all of the information in the description, so all the videos and your links and everything. But Ken, thank you so much. I have had a fantastic time asking you all of these questions. I hope you've had a good time too.
I really have. No, thank you, Hamza. I've enjoyed it greatly.
Thank you so much. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. This is another episode of the Modern Man podcast. Can't wait to see you on the next one. But don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Reach out to us if you have any questions. And like Ken said, I'll make sure to put all of his details in the description, so you can reach out to him if you would like to discuss any of the things that you've heard in more details. But until next time, I'm Hamza, and I've been your host, and it's been lovely to speak to you all. Have a nice day. Take care.